So, first of all, welcome everybody, and thank you all so much for coming. It's lovely to see everybody's faces. Sort of this is always nice because we all live in little cupboards and we don't always see each other and we miss all that connection. So, we thought today's topic, unfortunately, could not be better. As you see, our numbers are starting to go up again. We're switching from green to yellow, maybe towards orange, hopefully not. So we can see that the pandemic, unfortunately, it's not going away anyway anytime soon. So I was delighted to say that my colleague, John Orlowski, who's also on the Telemachus steering committee, that he also volunteered to basically help us run today's session, which I'm going to hand across to him. So it's really how do we handle it and how do we cope with long-term stress? Because long-term stress, as we all know, can have a very detrimental effect. It looks like this nasty thing is not going away. John, it's over to you.
Yes, so
thank you.
Could you switch me over to share my screen? I don't have permission.
That's Heather.
Oh, Heather?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been disabled.
Yeah.
So am I. Heather is the master controller. She sends us everywhere and tells us to be quiet. She's in charge.
So while we get this organized, again, I probably should start this talk by a disclaimer that I'm not an expert in this area, but I thought I would share what I've learned from my reading of the literature. And I often consider myself a jack of all trades and a master of none. So you'll have to take everything I say with a grain of salt, and hopefully we'll learn something from this exercise. Have I got the control yet? Yes, I do. All right. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
All right. Let me just minimize some of these things. Oops, that's the wrong. Okay, here we go. So yeah, so I think from the last session we had 2 weeks ago, Lisa Koski presented a presentation on a second look at psychological first aid, which really dealt with acute stress that we experienced during the early stages of this pandemic, as we switched in from our regular work habits to a completely different way of presenting things, and our whole world was shifted upside down. And so we've now had about 4 months of adapting to this change and adapting to our acute stress. But given now that the pandemic is likely to last a lot longer than we thought, perhaps indefinitely, or maybe at least until there's another vaccine, we thought it might be very helpful or instructive to at least long-term stress is really different from acute stress, and then how to manage it. And the managing part may not be that much different from acute stress, but I think recognizing what long-term stress is a slightly different beast. And so I think we all know what stress feels like, but I think truly understanding what stress is, what it is, and how to deal with it is somewhat challenging. And when we think about the acute stress that we experienced in the spring, we went from our normal routines to suddenly shifting all our lectures to online teaching. We had to deal with our children that were at home. We had to shift our responsibility if we were in the clinic to dealing with a healthcare system that wasn't quite up to snuff at that particular time. But there was this collective sense of stress from everybody. So in a sense, although there was stress, we felt somewhat we're in different notes, as was noted a lot of time, but we were able to sort of share this stress. However, as we move along, some of us have adapted to dealing with the stress and are fine. However, others may not be, and we're not all the same. I think what stress really varies according to the individual. And I think people that are still experiencing stress as we move along in this current paradigm of teaching and working, we may start to feel inadequate where some of our peers are actually coping quite well. And that may also add additional stress to the way we deal with our daily activities. And long-term stress is really not something that just sort of jumps out of nowhere. It's sort of a very gradual process, and you may not have even realized it's slowly creeping up on you, where you've gotten used to dealing with stress, and then that stress just never really dissipates. So you've got used to it, but it has a long-term damaging effect. It can affect not only your mental and emotional. And so I think it's really important to recognize what long-term stress is before it gets out of control. And I think once you've identified these changes in your behavior, the way you feel, the way you think, and the way you operate, I think you can start to work towards, again, managing that stress, but it's being able to recognize it. And as this little cartoon here shows you, there's this sort of bell-shaped curve where there's an optimal amount of stress which we've been dealing with, I think, since the spring and up through the summer, which has actually been, it's been good that it's been during the summertime, because often, our workloads decrease during that period of time. I'm not sure that was true this year, but anyway, it's an optimal level of stress. But as it continues onwards, there is a negative side to stress, and that's what we'd like to discuss today. So what are the symptoms of long-term stress? So there are many physiological changes. Stress, it releases adrenaline, cortisol, and that energizes you. Cortisol stimulates gluconeogenesis, stimulates glucose release. You feel energized and able to handle all the different challenges. But with long-term stress, you start to develop a lot of other symptoms that due to a depressed immune system, as well as other factors that arise from a lot of stress hormones, so headaches, tension, pain, fatigue, anxiousness, moodiness, anger, insomnia, loss of libido, and because of your depressed immune system, often frequent illnesses, a lot of colds. We're coming up the flu season again, and that's going to be another complicating factor in how we deal with the pandemic and our health and the jobs that we're supposed to do. There's constant worrying, I think, is a classic symptom of long-term or chronic stress. You have difficulty concentrating, you make poorer decisions, you, in fact, your work level decreases, the quality of your work is probably not up to par, you're making more errors. And there's also a tendency to avoid others because you feel you're not quite energized, you feel depressed, and that tends to isolate you from your co-workers and your family members. And often there's also sometimes substance abuse, which also can be a complicating factor. And so what can you do to help yourself? I thought maybe with this slide, we just sort of compare the two different scenarios of stress. There's acute stress and chronic stress or burnout. And really stress, in fact, at least acute stress, is really an overabundance of activity in most cases. Whereas chronic or burnout is where there's a loss of energy, a sort of a disengagement from your life in a sense. So stress, you have overengagement, you're overactive, you're hyperactive, because you're stressed. When you are put on the spot to deal with a certain situation, you're not quite prepared to handle it. And that can lead to some illness. But burnout is really a complete lack of energy, a complete lack of motivation, drive. You feel helpless, you feel hopeless, you're emotionally drained, and in some cases, in worst case scenarios, you don't even feel it's worth living. Now, we're not in that situation per se. It's not that kind of a dire situation, but I think there is this lack of energy, the lack of feeling like you're part of society. You're disconnected from your group. And so in the last week, Lisa Koski talked about the 3 L's, to look, listen, and link to assistance. I think I'd like to introduce the 3 R's to understand burnout. So to recognize the warning signs where you feel just totally seeking support and managing stress. And those are some of the tools that Lisa referred to in her last presentation, and I'll come to in a moment. And then resilience, to sort of, again, adapt new behaviors that will allow you to reverse this state and move on to improving your health and emotional well-being. And so tips for dealing with stress is really not that much different from, again, what Lisa had talked about last time. But really, it's time to take time for yourself, this self-care approach to exercise more, regardless of what type of exercise it is, to get outdoors, to do some walking, cycling, some aerobics, different kinds of relaxation techniques, deep breathing techniques, meditation. You can't stress enough the importance of a healthy diet. Sometimes when you're depressed, you end up eating all your comfort foods, but in the end, they're not really that good for you. You really have to take an approach to your things that healthy for you in terms of balancing your vegetables and other protein sources to ensure that you support your body, which needs good health, good food. Also, engage in your senses. So listen to some of the favorite music that you've always enjoyed. Baking smells can sometimes improve your mood. I have a dog, and she is an endless source of entertainment, so that no matter how depressed I feel, she's always uplifting, and it makes me laugh a lot. So if you haven't got an animal, get a dog. But otherwise, that's another strategy you can deploy. And then again, this goes back to what Lisa said: connect with friends that you are close to, engage with them, and have those friends apply the 3 L's: to look at you with sincerity, to listen to you with compassion and empathy, and then you get through this difficult time, to find professional services that may help you deal with the stress that you're experiencing. And also, you can never underestimate the importance of sleep. Even though insomnia is a classic condition of chronic stress or burnout, you really have to take a conscious effort to get well rested, and that will re-energize you as well. And so with those words, I think we can to this whole group discussion on how to go from band-aid response to acute stress to coping in the long term. So I think we really have to adapt our behaviors consciously and not let our state, that if you're feeling depressed, sort of drag you further down the line. We really have to try and change how you feel to improve your overall well-being. So with that, I will stop there, and I think we can probably go to small groups.
Thank you so much. I see a very nice message. And Monique Walker, where she was saying Sophie Lepin, who's a stress specialist, she actually refers to this as nuts, where N is novelty, U is unpredictability, T is threat to self, and S is senses of control. So I like the word nuts, it sort of fits nicely. And then also for anybody who's feeling very stressed and sort of needs some help, Leslie has put in a very nice connection where people can actually reach out to get some other help from professionals as well. So that's very useful. Thank you both. Heather, are you ready to put us into the strange orbit? So we're going into our small groups for 20 minutes, which seems like forever, but as we know, it's not. And then sure, Heather will bring us back, so then we can share what we have shared, what we find out with each other. Heather, do your goods.
All right.
I have to ask my Okay, I think I'm not sure. We lost a few on the way back, so I never know if they're lost somewhere and they're sitting all by themselves in some special waiting area or something, or they had to drop out. I never know what happens at this point. I have to say to Heather yet again, that was really 20 minutes. It seemed so short, is what I found. So John, I think we're all back, so I'm going to hand across back to you.
You're
John,
muted, John.
Yeah, I just realized that. So we had 6 groups, and so I'll just go down the list here if I can find my list now that oops, wrong file. So Bernard, perhaps you can start off by summarizing what happened in your group.
Sure. So a few people, what seemed to come out of that group is the amount of stress, the amount of demand seems to have increased and not decreased. And it's come from different the people working with the virus and projects, whether in hospitals or trying to find ways to assay the virus, from different expectations in teaching. And so one end of it has been increased stress, increased demands, with some unexpected. The other one is the inability to, knowing that you need to find time to stop and do something else, whether it be going for a walk or reading a book or talking to a friend, and just disconnecting, knowing that you need to do that and the inability to do that because you're so obsessed about what has to be done and how far behind you are. And so this has built stress in several people in a way that is well beyond, and so strategies were mentioned. There's a book that was mentioned that is apparently quite good. Real Happiness at Work. I don't know about it, but I'm going to look it up. And I don't know if anybody else from my group wants to add anything else.
If not, Nico, how was your group?
Yeah, so we had a really good discussion, and the group was such that there were very different situations. Some of us were teaching and found it hard to teach remotely. Some had young kids at home, which made it quite difficult to juggle between the work demands and family and so on. Like everybody agreed that yes, we must accept that we are at a slower pace, that everything's uncertain and so on. To be seen whether people we work with understand time or we can be slower. There was also discussion about so some people were saying that were more optic view of yes, it will be still a long way to go, but someday it will be over, maybe as early as next year. But in other people, the as early as next year is more, well, okay, I need to continue like that in this very stressful situation until next year. So, and we were talking, like even before the small groups, about coping mechanism, how to address that in the longer term. So there was some discussion about how to find mechanisms to adapt to that. So some talked about creating a routine for ourselves, and which might be more or less difficult depending on your family direction. We were discussing also the way much difficult, impossible. Some meetings with friends and families that we have outside, respecting the 2 meters, but in the backyard, or with students, meeting them in a park. This very soon will not be possible anymore. So some people were talking about they're looking into air cleaners, air purifiers from home that maybe could increase the chance of being able to meet people indoor. We were talking about also sports that will be exercising that will be a bit more difficult during the winter. So some people are looking into the activities they could do outdoor. So yeah, it's a difficult situation. There's a lot of stress around, but people are trying to prepare to face the fact that we have a winter ahead of us and a big academic year. So to think about other things and makes life like thinking only about COVID and about the next deadline.
Amy? Thanks, Nico.
Yeah, thanks, John. So yeah, we had this discussion in part that, there's professional stresses, and for some people, those are relatively little. They've been able to sort of, it's been positive, immersing themselves in sort of new professional challenges or teaching, different aspects of research, but also the personal that we're trying to balance, and that how our lives have sort of become filled with these many more smaller decisions, things that seem small but seem very important sort of in our day-to-day lives. And so the idea of how do you control that, and that, giving yourself more structured organization can help, as with sort of go each day, and including in those personal time for exercise or hobby, or just to give yourself the space. And that's, I think, what is people are finding the challenge at times, given that we are all so much more accessible. Like it seems, people are always available for a meeting. Very seldom do I get put off for meetings anymore. And it's because they aren't traveling, and we're just, we're stuck to our computers. And when you're on Zoom, you're not accomplishing the rest of your list. So it's really keeping organized, finding space for yourself, exercising, and the importance of maintaining connections with others. So people you work with, extended family, and it was mentioned that there's more checking in, like the more like, how are you, or how are you doing? It's more real now. It's not just sort of, part of a high. It's people want to know, and are aware and looking out for that. So it's, thought this was going to be sort of a sprint at first, and it's that transition sort of in our training, in how we deal with our days, but also in how we deal with our stress, of transitioning from sprint training to the marathon, and so moving that forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Amy. Leslie?
Thanks. As usual, we had a really interesting mix of folks from across the faculty. As usual, one of the things I'm grateful for this pandemic is this chance to meet this random section of the faculty each time. It's always fascinating. And echoing what some have said already, I guess I was struck by the varied nature of the challenges people were facing, and that not only the professional stressors that we all have faced to varying degrees, but each person has their own individual set of particularities, whether it's personal health or family or whatever, that multiply the stress. People are bearing up, but I'm impressed at what they're coping with. We discussed the fact that COVID is like, it's pushing on our, not only does it know about our ACE receptors, but it seems to know what we need to be stress resilient. We need social contact, and the chance to to sing together came up as an example of like a very human kind of social contact that is specifically dangerous. Like that's
karaoke
meaning of that virus. So one of the conclusions was that we would develop a faculty helping faculty caroling, holiday caroling by Zoom exercise. So if there's anyone musical in this extended group, please get in touch. Prioritize decisions about what to take that in COVID, for example, research opportunities that were novel and then that way interesting maybe, or to stay close to what your true research passion is, for example, the balancing those things. And we talked about the positives and the need to keep remembering those. And whatever you can say about the challenges of academic work, it's a lot less challenging than many of the other types of work or lack of work one might be facing across the whole society. So we're lucky in that sense. And that whatever the downsides were of the pandemic over the summer, in many cases it meant adult children were home again, or other kinds of interactions that might not have otherwise been happening were happening, or people were having the chance to do things they normally do because their usual activities were disrupted. So they were learning new things or having different experiences. We all agreed that winter is coming as a whole. The run all of this back, fascinating. We're going to have to call on our special Canadian resilience But on the plus side, we will not have to do as much shoveling out in the wee hours or waiting through the slush to the metro for those who are working more from home. So maybe winter will be cozy and have some pluses. So it was very interesting.
Thank you, Leslie. And
so we also had groups of people from across the different divisions in medicine, which was wonderful because it's always fascinating to hear the different concerns and demands of the different groups. So again, very similar, where people were talking about their demands, their increase in demands is like threefold to what it usually is. So what the suggestions were was to have, if possible, at least a routine, because we're all good at saying you should do this, but to actually do it yourself, it can be difficult at times. So what we thought was good, the colleagues that were on with me, they have very set regimes, like for example, 8 o'clock, this I will do. And they do that not every single day. So they set their own structure, or they know that at 5 o'clock, I'm going to do my run. So they do the run automatically at 5 o'clock, which is very, very good, very organized. Also, there was discussion about sort of a lot of times that you would look at your schedule of what you have to do, but you prioritize. And every day you prioritize, and you may reprioritize again in that day. And for some things, you may have to just let them drop off, because in the big picture, how important are they? You know, what's going to happen if I don't do that today or even tomorrow? It's not a major issue. So you have to be nice to yourself and not sort of demand quite as much on yourself. This is some of the feedback as well. Then from some of the clinical side, which I found fascinating, was they've been doing a lot of telemedicine with the patients and with their colleagues in different disciplines together, and they loved it. They basically thought it very, in this case, that the parents of the sick children were actually more relaxed in a way, so they were giving more information, so they could actually see something very positive that was coming out of this and be able to do follow-ups and everything linked with that. Also, trying to meet with people at the appropriate social distancing. We didn't talk singing, which, you know, but from the appropriate social distancing outside, people thought that was good. The concern was, how do we deal with that then also in winter? So we were discussing about these like, I don't know what they're called. They're like these large things like our furnaces that produce heat outside that you see a lot of times in sort of up a mountain where you have a rug and stuff. You know, is this the way to move forward to be able to handle this? So there was discussions basically linked with that. And I think that was my main things. If there's anything I missed from my colleagues, please don't be afraid to speak up.
thank you, Anne. Yeah, I think, you know, from what everybody's been saying, and also from within our group, one of the things that really stood out that people, the loss of our normal social networks. We still have our work networks, and we can do Zoom, and you can do Zoom with your friends, but the actual physical community sense that you get when you're with friends and other people is what people miss the most, I think, from what I can tell. And that takes its toll, because that is a very, you know, we almost take it for granted. And then when it's gone, you realize there's this big vacuum. And although it is great to Zoom with our colleagues and some of our family members that are far away, it's those direct social contacts that I think are taking a toll. And as one person pointed out, we're in this sort of middle ground of the stress spectrum, where we're habituating to sort of this acute stress phase, or that middle ground, and how it will take its toll over the ensuing months as we move into winter, where you tend to be a little bit more cloistered indoors, or be outdoors as much, unless you're an outdoorsy person like, you know, ski or something like that. I don't know, but it will be a challenge, and I think it's something we have to sort of find some remedies to, particularly since we moved this slow zone now in Montreal, and whatever gatherings we thought we could do outdoors or within indoor settings may have to be reduced. And I think that's something to work on as we go through the next several months. Are there any other comments that people would like to add, since we have a few minutes left? Feel free to speak. There was one comment, which was on the chat board, was that Mott is hosting a wine and cheese event this Friday. So, and they are also going to have a concert on Zoom, so music. So I think that would be a great thing to partake in. And we'll probably have to do more of those kinds of things as we go through these next several months.
Very good. I'm not hearing any more questions at this point, so I'm going to say on behalf of all of us, John, thank you so much for doing this round. Cheers to you for that. Thank you. I think it was very useful, very informative. I learned some coping techniques, so I'm very happy. Also, just remind you, and maybe Leslie on the spot here. So Leslie will be our next host, and it's going to be October 7th. And her working title at the moment is
I think I have the slide.
Is managing and supporting your team in a pandemic, which is, there it is, addressing performance issues and making difficult conversations easier. Leslie, do you want to add anything more to that?
Well, we'll see. I mean, of course, I don't pretend to be an expert on this or anything. Ideas how dealing with, I guess, a real word was something like, is it okay to step on someone's toes in a pandemic? So I'm interested to hear how people are dealing with the sort of next level out. I look forward to seeing you all on October 7th. And thank you, John and Anne and Heather and everyone who's putting this stuff together in the background. And thank you all for coming out for this, and encourage your colleagues to join in. It's really no problem to have larger groups. As you see, it works well in the breakout rooms. Good to see you all.
Yes. Yeah, yes, thanks everyone for showing up.
Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Everybody stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.